What's going on, guys? Hello and welcome to BusyWorksBeats.com. We are back. In this video, I was creating some new expansions for my pack called Helios, which is a Serum 2 expansion. And I was like, let me just show you guys how to create some analog type sounds. So you might think you have to go out and buy these $1,000 Moogs and all this type of stuff. You don't necessarily have to do that to get a really close analog sound. So what I'm going to show you guys is some techniques. So bear with me. I don't know how long the video will be, but I'm going to show you guys secret sauce in this video. This is not like a beginner's tutorial at all. So the first thing is understanding the filters. Let's program in some MIDI real quick. All right, so here's some MIDI. The first thing I'm going to do is activate the filter. This is the most obvious approach to analog, but most people don't understand the filter. So this is a Moog filter. We're going to switch it to Moog low pass filter with 24 dB per octave cutoff, so the slope is a lot stronger. And what people overlook is this drive knob. This drive knob adds saturation or more frequency content to the existing sound. So basically, we can get saturation without the super bitey high end because it's being filtered. So we're saturating everything below the filter and it creates a more full sound without doing much of anything. So now we have a bass. And now let's add some drive. Now this sawtooth already has an aggressive sound. I'll show you guys how to turn up this drive. Now you have to match the output so that it's not just clipping. Another thing we're going to do is put this on monophonic mode just for this bass line. It's a little more smooth. Okay, now we can open up the cutoff filter for more or less harmonics. Now the thing about analog is that it's not super pointy in the waveform. So let me kind of jump ahead a little bit. If you go to the pencil tool here, we can go to where it says single process, but before you even click single processes, we want to change the grid size. So depending on if you want it less detailed, go down in size. If you want it more detailed, go up in size. So smoother means going up. We change the grid to 20. I don't know if the horizontal matters, but let's just up this to 20 as well. And now what we're going to do is go to where it says process single, and let's go to filter by the grid size. So what this is going to do is round off the sawtooth so it's not so aggressive, okay? And we got rid of a lot of harmonics in that case. And now we can open up the filter without it getting too bitey. And then we can use the drive knob to add more saturation into the sound. So it still has that saw feel, but it's not saw bitey and aggressive like digital stuff. So a lot of the analog, that you guys love, it's saturated. It's just not saturated to the level of where it's, hundreds of harmonics. Okay, so that's one way to go about it. Now, another way to add harmonics, let's pull back the dry level here. Let's go to the effects and let's go to where it says effects. Let's go to where it says distortion. This one kind of hit or miss. It's really hard to control. I'd rather do this with a third-party plugin, but we're going to keep this on what's called tube saturation. So tube saturation replicates a sound going through a processor and literally going through tubes until the waves collide to create different waveforms. And that's how they created, saturation, because they use wave interference. Okay, so now we're going to use the analog tube sound. This is more for bass sounds if I had to. So it's like that Mike Dean kind of bite on the sound. Here's without it. Here's with it. So now it feels like a sawtooth, the gritty part, but without that bitey, aggressive, high-end tone. Another way we can achieve this is by going to the front panel, going to the warp section and messing with the bend. So if you go to alternative warps, we have bend plus and bend minus. We're going to use the bend plus in this case, and it changes the curvature, I'll say, of the amplitude. So now we're getting a less full sound. So when you turn this up, you're going to get a thinner sound, basically. And you guys can modulate this over time with different LFOs. So, one kind of common technique I'll do, and also you guys want to try out the sync. So sync is when you modulate a sound source by itself, I believe. Or, I believe that's what it is. I don't even know the technical definition for sync. But let's mess with this. And we could also change the curvature with this secondary green knob right here. So this is all tone. So if you ever wonder how they get that type sound, it sounds like FM to me. That's how they get that tone. They modulate the sync like that. I rarely use sync, but it's good for, I guess, bass sounds in that case when you need upper harmonics. Like right here. If you have a really low octave, it adds that bite. But if you're in a higher octave, sync isn't always the greatest starting point. So in this case, we'll go down an octave and we'll turn up sync. Now, a good habit you guys want to mess with is using LFOs or randomness to control a range of something. So let's say I want this sync modulation to kind of wobble over time. We can add an LFO. Let's drag it over top of the sync. We need to give it a range. I don't want it to go wow the whole time. So we need to pull in what's called the range. Let's pull this in to about like 0.5 of its value. So it's very, very small of a range. Even smaller than this. Okay, and then we're going to set the LFO here to Hertz mode so that we can control how fast it goes. And let's pull this to a really, really slow speed, like 0.01, which is a really, really low speed. So you won't be able to audibly hear this. Now, I would have to hold a really long note for you guys to even hear the changes. But basically, this LFO takes a long time to go up and a long time to come back down. It's a triangle shape at a very, very slow speed. Okay, so you can use this to modulate your filter cutoff. Again, we're not trying to modulate it in a wide sense. We're just trying to modulate it in a very small range. So you want to pull in this range, this blue area, to a very small amount. You could also do the same thing to the fine tune pitch. I'd recommend keeping everything between 31 cents and below. Once you go around 30 cents and up, you really hear the detuning and it becomes a distraction in most cases. Now, also we can do something different with the fine tune. Actually, let's remove that modulator, but that's another way you guys can do it. For longer notes, like if I hold this, let me speed up the rate so you guys can hear. Hear how the tuning is changing? That's basically what vibrato is. Okay, but we're doing this at a really, 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 really slow pace. So it's 0.01. Now, I'm going to do a different thing for the fine tune pitch for now. Okay, but that's how you can add really, really subtle moves so that it's a little bit more modulated over time. Now, another thought process, this is just a thought process, is to go to the editor tool here, turn off what's called the fundamental. I think there's a function for this. If you go to, let me see if I can find it here. If we go to single process, we can, where is it at here? There used to be, or maybe I'm just making this up. If we go to, here it is. If you go to all, you can do what's called remove the fundamental frequency, which is that first thing here. Okay, we can remove that. Okay, and which is the core part of the sound. And what we'll do is add a sub oscillator, and this will act as the fundamental frequency. And this is how you add a little more density to your track. You know, essentially, you know, what's the word I'm looking for? The fundamental frequency is always a sine wave. So me replacing it with the sine wave really isn't doing anything. If we get the levels right, it will sound exactly the same. But now we can control the level. We could also do that in a wave editor. But another thing we could do now with the sub oscillator is run it through different filters. So let's run it through a filter. Let's switch this to, I think by default it's in. Okay, let's run it through filter 2. Let's turn filter 2 on. And now what we can do is create custom harmonics for this fundamental frequency. So now we're stacking the harmonics of this sound, which only has what? The first harmonic, second harmonic, third, fourth, fifth harmonic. It only goes up to the fifth. Now we can saturate the sub oscillator to create new harmonics, and then we can use the low pass filter to cut out the harmonics that we don't want. So we're essentially stacking two different harmonic series over top of each other. And this is going to, again, give you more randomness. And you're also going to have some phase cancellation there, wave cancellation. You hear that wobble? Okay, so now I just got to control the level of the sub and the cutoff frequency here until I get to the sound level that I actually want. Okay, so if I turn off oscillator A, this is what the sub's doing. I could pull up Wave Candy, but you can tell there's harmonics there. I'm not going to bore you guys to tears about which harmonics. It's buzzier than its initial state. If I take it out with the filter, So what it sounds like if I add it to the filter, it sounds a little more buzzy. So that's what we're adding underneath this track. So we're swapping out the fundamental frequency. That's another technique you guys could use to add more density. Now, another thing we could do is, now by default, this is already set to random phase, meaning every time I hit a note, it triggers at a different position on this wave. Okay, so it's not going to just pull from the same spot every single time, because what that will do is create potential just wave cancellation and a lot of flaw. So this is random, okay? It's looking at this waveform and it's going to randomly position itself. And so if you move the phase, it gives you a better idea of what phase is doing. So phase, when it's at 0, it only starts at this specific spot. Now, if you increase phase, it has a random range. So it can start from anywhere between that yellow range. Okay, so it's like it chooses where it wants to start. So it creates more of a random wave interference. Okay, but that's already set by default. You guys don't have to mess with that. Nextly, let's add, we already did, again, I showed you guys how to add the LFO to the fine tune knob, but I'm going to do a different approach. It's a little more creative. But you could add this 0.01 hertz filter over to the fine tune and just modulate it that way. But the thing is, you would have to hold the note really long in order to hear the difference, because essentially it's going so slow, it has no change, especially if you change notes a lot. That's my synth, actually, that you guys are hearing. I have to turn that off. I forgot I don't have my synth plugged up. All right, so the next thing here is, let's say you want to add unison. The old way of creating, let me just do it the old way, just so you guys understand what unison actually is. Unison is when you have multiple voices playing the same waveform, detuned by a little bit. I'm not sure if we can copy and paste waves. I don't know if that's possible. I'm sure you could save it. I don't feel like doing all that. So let's just open up a new oscillator. We're going to have oscillator B go through filter 1. And we need to, again, this is too jagged of an edge to be analog. So let's go to the pencil tool. Look at all these harmonics up here. That's, that's a lot. Okay, now we're going to go to where it says single. Before this though, set your grid size. Go to where it says single, and then we are going to filter via the grid size. Another cool technique you guys can mess with is sample redux at grid size. So this kind of squares off the curvature. It makes the conversion less accurate and less round. And it creates a ringy type of tone, like that yeet type sound. So if I turn off oscillator A in the sub and I play a low note, you hear that, that's that yeet sound. And you get that because we're squaring off the edges, which create harmonics. Okay, and that's how we get these crazy set of harmonics there. So it's not a normal sawtooth, okay? And especially when it's rounded like this. So that's another technique I like, especially for lo-fi sounds. That's a really good technique. Now, what we would do back in the old times is we would have this oscillator. Let me click the screen. We would have oscillator A, oscillator B. And then what we would do is set the fine tune of B so that it's different from A. And let me put these to the same octave here so that we could hear the difference. So by default, it sounds like this. Everything just feels cohesive. Okay, now if we detune it, it's going to sound more like a respace. Because now we have wave cancellation due to the frequency, lack of consistency in the frequency matching. So now we get negatives meeting positives that cancel out. You get a really unique sound. And this is how they would basically create width. Okay, they would pan one left, pan one right, and then detune them from each other. Now Moog would have 3 oscillators, so let's add another oscillator here. Oscillator C. Let's go to edit, and let's just make small changes so that everything's not the same waveform. Let's do the same thing. Click the single process. Let's go to filter size, redux, and let's see what else we could do. Let's maybe lower the grid. I'm curious to see what it sounds like. It's probably too round, yeah. All right, let's up this to this size, and how do we get our sawtooth back? We got to get our sawtooth back. Now, this is a different waveform. This is not a sawtooth. So to be fair, I need to go back to the actual sawtooth here for this to be equivalent. Okay, so let's edit. I was messing with different grid sizes. Let's filter. Okay, now we have oscillator C. Now we're going to turn this one down. Now, usually speaking, that we're getting really in the weeds here, but if you approached it like a Moog, sometimes the Moog Oscillator 3 would be used to modulate the sound because we could pitch this down 2 more octaves and make it an LFO. So this was like LFOs before LFOs. So if I go bring this sound down, hear how it modulates more than it's a tone. It's like, brrr, it's more of a frequency, haptic type frequency. So let's drop this one down an octave. And if we want more of that brrr effect, we could just turn it up. Now, if we want this to be more of an LFO, we would drop it all the way down. Hear the volume go like that. So it'd be normal shapes like a sine wave. In this case, I'm using a really weird wave. But we can also modulate the volume that way. But let's just keep it at -2 for now. Okay, and then let's make sure we have that sub. And as we're clipping, let's turn the output down so that we're not clipping. Because when you guys clip it, it adds more tones that aren't actually there. So this is what we have so far. Let's pull our MIDI up an octave. Now we have a very Kanye type Moog sound. Now we're not done. So another thing we could do here is modulate the unison by this LFO. We're not using unison here, but let's just start using unison here. My favorite number is 7. Let's detune this. Now, unison would also be a separate button on the analog synths. And when you press that button, you would have to play in mono most of the time. Now, in this case, we're going to remove some oscillators. Because I think back then they would unison everything, so it wouldn't just be one thing unison. I'm not sure how it worked, but there'd be one button called unison. So we would have to do, I guess, that to every oscillator here. Let's see what that even sounds like. Okay, so what we're going to do now is add an LFO over the detune range, and then we're going to give it a range and make it a very, very small range. Now, again, this detune, this LFO works at a very, very slow amount, so you're not even really going to perceive this, especially with everything already detuned. But it makes the detune process more random. Now, again, there's another way to modulate that, which I'll get into. So again, you usually want to stick between 2 to 7 voices. Once you go above 7, it's kind of smeary and phasey for the unison, but that's not a hard rule by any means. All right, so there's another parameter here that you guys want to check out, and it's called the random discrete function. So if we open up the settings here, we can go to the width. Let me turn off oscillators B, C, and the sub. So when you add unison, you have what's called a width. So let's pull these back to the center. I forgot we did that. Pull these to center. And this is important because we have now left-right differences. So it sounds like a width. Okay. So what we can do is right-click and modulate the width with a note on random discrete. And basically this is a true random without it syncing up with the other random stuff. Now to control the range, we can go to the mix matrix, I should say the matrix, and then set the range here. So let's say I want that to be between, now it says 100 and 100. So let's turn it down. I think we have to turn it down first in order to have a range. It's hard to kind of tell with this. There's no coloration on it, so it's hard to tell. So let's do negative. Let's do a bipolar unison, and let's tell the range to be, why is this? I guess it's set however we set it. Let me see, guys. Hold on. Let's set this to 0. There we go. And then this range should be whatever we set, negative 56 to 56. There we go. So now we can control how wide. And this is random based on the note. So every time I hit a new note, it picks a random position here. So it could be mono sounding or it could be wide sounding. Now that's another way to add, analog randomness. Now this sound is very full, so I'm going to pull back some of the oscillators here. Okay, now we're getting into the mixing realm. When you guys want to add like some kind of pseudo, I forgot we had this on too. But if you guys want to add some subtle realism, you guys can go to what's called the reverb or the convolver reverb. Let's go to reverb here. And we're going to add what's called early reflections. So early reflections is like when I speak, my voice goes to the wall in front of me. It hits the wall behind me. It goes in every direction. Early reflections is calculating, how fast does my voice take to go from my mouth to the wall, to this wall, to that wall, and then back into the microphone. Okay, so I think, waves, the voice travels at what, 340 meters per second squared or something? I forgot the exact math. Yo, I haven't been in physics in a minute, but sound moves at like 340 meters per second or second squared. I forget the exact, if it's squared or not. And my point here is that there's a speed to it. So we're going to reduce the size here of the room, and we could use plate reverb. We're not going to use a hall reverb because that's a big space. We're treating this as if we're in a small room. So we're going to go to size small and then turn up the mix level so you guys can actually hear it. So it should feel like it's coming out of some kind of room. And that little bit of reverb just makes the sound feel real. So let's pull this back. We don't need to make it super loud, so let's just pull it back. Now you can't detect it, but because I showed you guys, you can actually start to realize that it feels more real. And let's see what else we have here. So there's a lot of ways to add randomness. Another way here, which is a really unique technique, is to go to LFO2, switch this to sample and hold mode, which creates like a linear random value. And we are going to attach this, which sounds weird, to the envelope attack curvature. Okay, so this, you got to be a little precise here. We are going to set the attack here to about 5 to 10 milliseconds. I'm going to exaggerate this so you guys can see, but the envelope one's attack, I should say, controls all the amplitude for the entire serum. So let's make this more of an exponential curve, which looks like this. This is more what analog stuff would do, is more like this curvature than this curvature. Let's do something like this. The decay curvature, we have to pull the sustain down for us to actually see it, and it will look the same exact way, something like this. Okay, and then we're going to pull up the sustain, which is how, when we hold the envelope, what's the volume we get. Now I'm exaggerating here so you guys get. Okay, but we're going to pull this back to about 10 milliseconds at the highest. Usually I start at like 5 milliseconds, but let's go to 10 milliseconds in this case. We're going to grab LFO2, drag it over top the attack curvature. So what this is going to do is create basically a pseudo random value per the attack per voice. So every time I hit a key, it will have a different attack time. So let's pull this range so that it's not super wide. Let's pull it into where it's like 8 milliseconds up to about 10. I would say maybe even 20 something. We don't want it to get too aggressively on the attack because then it will sound like a different type of sound, like a pad sound. You could also you could also do the same thing here with the release tail if you guys use it for your sounds. This sound is needed, but let's add a release tail just for the example here. So now this is on random. These random values are going to the release tail here. Another thing you could do to make this more real, like to give it movement and expression, and also a good tip to do is save your stuff as you're going. So this is going to be the Helios expansion pack. So this is the Helios expansion. You guys can find Helios at busyworksbeats.com/Helios. We have 340 sounds for Serum. Let's call this Moog. Let's call it like bass Moog 1. All right, it's just so we have a template in case FL crashes or something. And what we can do is set the velocity here to the amplitude. So we have to go to the matrix here, switch the modulating the source. So let's do velocity. Let's do note velocity, and let's control the drop down here. Let's go to global and amplitude. So this will control basically how hard I hit a key, which I can't demonstrate because I don't have my MIDI controller. But if you're creating a range basically. Okay, guys. So the range here, you can read the values as 0 to 100. So if I play the notes at a low velocity in my piano roll, the volume should get quieter. I don't hear it getting quieter, so let's figure out why that is. Make sure our matrix is set right. Let's see what value it's reading here. So this global amp, let's figure out why we are not perceiving this. Okay, so it turns out my release tail and the fact that I had the monophonic mode on was overriding the fact that we had the velocity sensitivity. So you guys weren't hearing that because of the monophonic overlapping of notes. So that was my doing there. So basically, we should hear the volume difference now. Now, I would not play bass this dramatic. I'm just trying to show you guys the velocity sensitivity. So these low volumes, and then you hear the high volume right there. Another thing we could do with velocity is control the cutoff filter. So we could do the same thing in the Matrix, or you could just right click the filter cutoff, right click, go to mod source, go to note, and then velocity. Or you could assign this to the mod wheel. Again, I don't have my MIDI controller plugged up because I'm charging my other keyboard right now. But you guys can set this to velocity or even the mod wheel, which will allow you to manually express through the mod wheel. So that is another way to do it. But in this case, we'll just say we want the velocity to control the cutoff. Let's go to the Matrix and let's set the range. So now if the velocity notes are higher, the filter opens up. So I'm going to exaggerate this so you guys can hear it. Let's turn the filter down. And now you guys, let me turn off the amplitude modulation. Another thing is if you go to the global tab, switch here and go to ultra mode and lock it. That way you don't mess with that. Let's go to the Matrix. And I believe that's their oversampling mode if I'm not mistaken. Let's go to here. Let's switch the amp mode off just for this demonstration. I just want you guys to see as the velocity gets higher or goes higher, whatever, it triggers a more open filter. So that's another way to create expression without like modulating a lot of stuff. Now I'm exaggerating so you guys can hear. I would not do it to that level. I would usually just have it more subtle. So let's do something like this. Okay, and let's see what else we have. Let's turn our distortion back on. I'm going to turn off unison because I want to show you guys a different technique for panning. So let's take off unison for now. Because a Moog is really monophonic. You're not going to hear stereo from a Moog. So that's not going to sound like a Moog to your ear. You would have to add a chorus pedal or something outside of the Moog for it to be wide like that. But I'm going to show you guys a different technique. Here's my kind of favorite technique. If you go to Matrix, this works really better for pads. So let me save this. And let's go to where it says the drop down here in the Matrix. Let's click here. Let's go to Notes on Alternative. And we're going to set the range all the way. We're going to click here, go to Oscillator A, pan. And we want this left and right. So basically, Oscillator A can be panned left and right. So every time I hit a key, it pans the opposite direction. See how one's left, one's right? Now we're going to do the opposite for the other oscillators. Now, I'd recommend you only keep like 2 oscillators moving. The other, you don't want all 3 moving because then it's not going to sound right, in my opinion. So let's do the opposite direction. We want it on bipolar mode, so it's left and right panning. And then we want the opposite direction because we want A and B to be panned opposite of each other. So every time I hit a note, A and B basically switch sides. Let's turn off the sub oscillator. When you combine this with, let's switch it up. Let's make it only A so that you guys could actually hear. So you guys can hear, it switches sides every time I hit a key. And this is essential for width in your track. Now again, a Moog wouldn't naturally do that. So that's more of like, again, that's more for pads in my opinion, polyphonic things. But you could use it for this type of sound. Let's just pull in the range so it's not so far left and so far right. In this case, it takes away from the Moogness, so I'm going to turn it off. But that's a great technique when I go to show you guys how to design more of a pad sound. We're going to do that for the pad type polyphonic sound. Okay, so there's so much to show you guys that I'm really going through my notes. So we have delay. Let's go to the effects, show you guys a quick little delay trick. If you go to delay and set your feedback somewhere around 50% or so, just turn your filter off by just left click, grab the Q value. And let's go to millisecond mode and we're going to turn this down all the way. Now you can have your left and right different depending on how you guys want this. And you could even switch this to ping pong mode. And what we're going to do is just give it a mix level here. So this is going to create like a psychoacoustic. It's almost like it's flipping the inversion, the polarity. You guys feel that like kind of hollowness. So I'm going to exaggerate the release times here on the delay. And now it sounds like it's coming from like a pseudo room. Let's turn off these effects. It's kind of hard here. So here's off. Here's on. It feels like it's coming from a space. So to create this effect, it's usually, you know, around 20 milliseconds to 50 milliseconds. Once you go above that point, it starts sounding like a delay. So anything after 20 milliseconds, it's getting into delay territory. And the key though is this feedback. So if I turn feedback off, it only gives you one response, but if you turn it up, you get more of a phasey. Feels like you're in a room. So it's similar to the reverb trick. We're gonna blend that in. So now it feels like a real thing in a real space. So I'm skipping my notes because I showed you guys a lot of this stuff. So let me find my notes. One last technique we could do before we move into the next sound is we can add an LFO to control an LFO. So for example, let's say I wanted to, I forget what this even is controlling. So we have LFO2 controlling the attack time, which you guys are not really going to hear the difference there. But if I go to LFO1, which controls, let's make it control our fine tune pitch here. Let's give it a range of like 31 cents. And we want the rate to move over time. So let's right click and modulate it by LFO3. So now LFO3's output, the speed of this will control this knob moving over time. So it could go from like here to here. So let's set a range so that it's not so crazy. Let's go to the matrix. The thing I love about the matrix is it tells you the value. Okay, so if you left click and just drop it down, we can set the hertz value. So I'd say the recommended hertz of vibrato is around 3 to 6 hertz. Once you go above 6 hertz, you're in really fabricated territory. So let's have that as the range here. So now depending on how this speed works, if I slow it down, for example, it's moving this knob based on that speed. So if I have this go fast, it will change those speeds quickly. And now let's turn off this stuff because you guys probably can't hear it. So here go like that. Let's slow it down first. So it goes like that. And let's set the low value here to 0.01. So you're not going to hear any pitch movement because it's too slow. But if we up the speed here, now it has more chance to hit the higher hertz frequency that we have set. Let's make sure the matrix still has it at 3 hertz. That's the max value. So now the range is a little bit more obvious. Hopefully that makes sense. So it's not going like anymore. It's like it kind of goes fast and slow. To make this less apparent though, we're going to pull this back down because the range is a little too wide. So it's just adding a subtle pitch change. All right, now let's start from scratch. Let's create some kind of chord progression and make it sawtooth based. Here we have a trap melody. So let's apply all these techniques. First thing I'm going to do is reduce the waveform. We could do this in the effects as well, but let's go to the pencil tool here for the waveform. Let's go to process and let's make sure the grid size is big enough, or else we'll create a sine wave. Let's go to process. Let's go to filter by the grid size, and this will cut out some of the harmonics. Another one of my favorites is the single process called sample reduction by the grid size. Adds a little more like bitey sound that we get more in today's music. Let's add some detune here. Let's try 7 voice detune. Let's modulate the width here with a randomization by the notes. I know I'm moving kind of quick here, but we're just stacking all the stuff we already showed you. Guys. And let's set the width to 0 so that it has a starting point. And then in the matrix, we're going to set the width range to 100. So now it randomly picks between 0 and 100. Now let's mess with the attack curvature here. Let's set it to about 7 milliseconds. We're going to give this an SNH sample and hold filter, drag it over top of the attack, and just create a range from about 7 to 40 milliseconds, somewhere in there for the attack time. Do the same thing for the release tail, so it's more random. And let's also we have to add that exponential curvature, so it's more analog-ish. Do the same thing for your decay. I don't think we're going to use a decay on the sound though. And we're going to pull the attack back to where it started. Let's give it a little release tail, so it's almost like reverb in a way. So I like the tone. Let's do that technique where we remove the fundamental. So now it sounds hollow. Let's add the filter 2. Let's have the sub oscillator go through filter 2. And then now we can control the weight of the sound, but also the harmonics with the saturator, the drive tool here. There's also a level mixer on the filter if you guys want to turn down your filter. There's also a pan knob, which changes depending on the filter type. So let's see if we could use this to our advantage here. So it creates like an offset of like filtering one side versus the other side, and it creates a difference in the left and right ear. So we're getting a little more width out of the sound there. Let's also set this to 24 dB per octave curve. So it's a sharp cutoff of those harmonics. Okay, so now we have a lot of weight. Let's go to the effects here. I'm going to mess with some distortion here before we start adding more voices. Let's mess with this tube saturation. Let's do some pre-filtering here. Let me see here. Pre-filter. Only thing I don't like about the pre-filter is that I can't control the output as far as the frequency content. So let's not mess with the filter on this one. Now, a lot of people don't know that we're getting into the advanced stuff. You can click the effects here. You can go low, mid, and side split. And now I can process the mid frequencies different from the highs, different from the sides. For example, I could saturate the lows with the distortion, the saturation. And that way the highs aren't affected. And we could set the, the highest frequency of the lows, what's considered low. I want everything below about 100 hertz to be considered low. And then we're going to saturate that, which we already did with the filter in this case. But this is how you guys can add more harmonics. So now only the bass frequencies are being saturated and not the mid frequencies. Now we have a unique sound. Let's go back to the filter. Let's see if we reset this pan. I kind of like it offset. It just has a different sound to it. I might change this. I'm not sure. Okay, now let's go to the effects. Let's go to the middle section here. Let's add some compression. This is one of my favorite tools here because this could shape. If we go to multiband mode, whoa, sorry about that. So sometimes I mess with multiband for more aggressive sounds. Just depends. I don't know if there's a way to solo the mids, but do you hear that tone coming out of the sound? That so we're pulling more tone out of it without adding a bunch of harmonics. Technically we are, but in a different way. Let's add some highs here, and on the highs, let's just add an EQ and just boost up the highs to pull on those sample rate reductions. Let's add another oscillator here. Let's send it to filter 1. And let's have A and B go to filter 1. Let's add that drive. Switch it out, the filter type. So I like the highs on the sound, so I'm going to have the filter just be way on this. And let's add oscillator B here. Now remember, this is too bitey to be an analog sound here. Let's switch this to a filtered sound. Now I'm going to switch the filter size. The grid size here. Let's see if we get a different. Trying to avoid it turning into a sine wave, but I think we've already gone on sine wave. Okay, so we're going, let's add an octave up. Also, we can mess with some frequency modulation. I just want to see if this adds a unique tone. This is good for bass. It's really low modulator like that. But it gets a little muddy on this. I like the octave though. Let's watch that main output. Let's also make sure this is on ultra mode. One thing I forgot to show you guys, my bad, is if you go to the global tab, go to the detune knob, and basically you can click randomly over here and it will detune each. It will basically, every time you hit a key, it will cycle through this and detune it separately. Creates a nice lush sound. So we don't have to mess with the fine tune. If you guys want to, you can again right click, set this to note on random, and then go to your matrix and just set the range here to, like, again, I recommend you keep it below 30. Let's mess with the detune here. So let's say you want this to sound more expressive. We could set this level to trigger via the velocity. So depending on how hard I hit the key, it will trigger the oscillator B. Now this will be more expressive if I played it by hand. So let me plug up my MIDI controller. Okay, now I got the MIDI controller plugged up. It's a little bit easier to demonstrate sound. Okay, so let's say we want the FM to also be controlled by the, let's do the mod wheel instead. Okay, so the mod wheel is going to be on here. So if I turn the mod wheel up, it adds harmonics like that. Now I'm going to set a max level so that when I turn my mod wheel all the way up, it doesn't go all the way up. Say that I want the max to be here. I also want to set the cutoff to be controlled by the mod wheel. So it's usually pitch or harmonics that are controlled by the mod wheel or volume automation. See how now we're getting a really unique sound. Let's also try unison on our second oscillator here. I'm gonna pull back some of the release tail. So you hear that detuning? That's coming from that global tab. Sometimes the values are, 10 cents of range. So let's pull this in so it's not as far away. I'll exaggerate this so you guys can really hear the difference. This is going to sound crazy, but I just want you guys to hear this detune. Okay, so you can set it really far. I recommend keeping this within 10 cents because once you go above 10 cents in range, it just sounds, the ear can't understand where it's at. And apparently you can control this stuff with LFOs. I don't understand this yet, so I can't teach you guys this because I don't even understand it yet, or what these mean right here. But you can also solo which thing you want to be added to the detuning. So for example, if you don't want the sub oscillator to go through the detuning, you could turn that off. So now it's only referencing A, B, C, and our noise oscillator. Another thing we didn't even touch is the noise oscillator. So we can go to different noise colors. I like to start with the colors and run these through the filter. This adds a little bit more density to a track. To a sound, I mean. But sometimes the noise can get a little loud. So in this case, we're going to set this to the velocity and make the max value in the matrix a very small amount. So I would have to hit the keys really, really hard to trigger. Let's set this to like 12% max. And then we can also set the velocity curve to where I really have to slam on my keyboard to trigger the noise that much. So I set it to a exponential curve so that I really have to slam on my keyboard for the volume to even be considered high. One thing I forgot to modulate is the width for the second unison. So let's also modulate this by the notes in this case, random. And I'm going to pull in the unison width here too, so it's not 100%. Let's go back to find our other thing here. Let's pull it in. And one more thing I want to do is the note on alternative. We're going to pan oscillator A and B, left and right bipolar mode. And then let's just do A actually. So now every time I hit the key, it goes the opposite side. This adds more perceived width. And now you can really hear that detuning. So this is where you're gonna have to go into this area, make these moves a little bit smaller so it's not so aggressive. You guys are learning like absolute sound design sauce. This is stuff I use for my own sounds. You guys can learn more about sound design at busyworksbeats.com. We have a sound design course where I'll teach you guys beginner level sound design all the way up to advanced. We're barely touching the surface here. Let's lower the filter. It's a little too bright. We also need to give this a bigger range here for the filter. Okay, and then we can always go back and mess with our This is what it sounds like without the effects. Here's width. Okay, so from here you could add reverb, chorus, your favorite kind of things you would naturally do. One thing I forgot to add for this sound is a little bit of a pseudo reverb. Let's try that technique. It's with the small size. My real favorite sound is the delay. I'm more of a delay fan than a preset reverb fan. Anyhow, milliseconds 0. We're going to pull this to about. You can also set a range for the release or the right side delay time. So you can set a range here in the matrix. So basically, every time I hit a key, I could have it cycle between 20 to 80 milliseconds randomly. And basically, it's just more random. So let me exaggerate this so you guys can hear. Oh, it's off. Let's make sure this is on. Oh, we need a ping pong mode. Duh. There we go. So depending on the note, you could also set this to velocity sensitive. So how hard you hit the key. I use that on one of my sounds in Helios at busyworksbeats.com/Helios. So now it's more random. So let's create some kind of melody before we wrap this up. I know this video is super long, but you know, this is how we sound design. Let's add our other sound that we made. Let me save this, make sure we have it saved. So this will be in the Helios expansion. We'll call this like Pad Travis Dark. Let's add our Moog sound now. And we haven't even touched the other types of synthesis. We only are talking about wavetable synthesis here. Doom, 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 doom. Let's try our Moog sounds here. let's record this in. That bass is wicked. Let's play from the beginning here. Now, if you guys want to take it to a whole different level, I just thought about it. You can add this plugin called Gold Clip. This adds like a converter sound. So you can mess with the unity mode here and the saturation. Sometimes you don't need saturation though. So be careful with that. Let's click through the basses that we created. I think the first one is the best for this. Yeah, the first one was the best. All right, like I said, if you guys want to learn more about sound design, go to busyworksbeats.com. Share this with a friend who wants to learn sound design. Peace out, guys.